Two people can start today with the same paycheck, the same debt, and the same bank balance. And in 6 months, one of them can be in a completely different financial position than the other. Not because one of them got lucky, not because one of them suddenly earns more, because one of them followed a specific sequence in a specific order for 6 months and the other one didn't. That's the entire difference this video is about. It's because most people's finances aren't actually broken, they're just unmanaged. Nobody ever sat down and pointed them at a specific sequence of things to do, in order, on a timeline short enough to actually stick with. That's what this is. 6 months, 6 phases, laid out in the order I'd actually do them if I were starting from wherever you're starting right now. I want to be honest about what change means here, because I think a lot of content promises something it can't deliver. This isn't a promise that you'll be rich in 6 months, or debt-free, or that your entire financial life will be unrecognizable. What actually changes in 6 months is your trajectory, the difference between money that's drifting and money that's being directed somewhere on purpose. That shift is real, it's measurable, and for most people, it's the first time their finances have ever had an actual plan behind them instead of just a series of reactions to whatever happened that month. 6 months isn't an arbitrary number either. Researchers at University College London tracked how long it actually takes a new behavior to become automatic, something you do without having to talk yourself into it every time, and found a median of around 66 days, with a huge range depending on the person and the behavior. That study wasn't specifically about money, so I'm not claiming 66 days is some magic financial deadline. The broader point is that automatic behavior takes repetition, and 6 months gives this system enough runway to be practiced repeatedly instead of attempted for 3 weeks and abandoned. A plan that only lasts 3 weeks doesn't get far enough into that curve to survive contact with a bad month. Before month 1 starts, there's a 15-minute task that makes everything after it possible. Write down where you actually stand right now. Your major assets, cash, savings, investments, retirement accounts, and things like real estate if applicable, minus everything you owe, including credit cards, loans, and mortgages. Assets minus liabilities is your starting net worth. A recent survey found that 3 in 4 Americans can't estimate their own net worth without checking an app or account first, and only about 1 in 4 track it regularly. That's not a knock on anyone's intelligence. Net worth just isn't a number most people are ever prompted to calculate, so it quietly stays unknown for years, even for people who check their checking account balance constantly. It doesn't matter if your number is negative. It doesn't matter if it's embarrassingly small. Write it down anyway, because 6 months from now, this number is what proves whether anything actually changed, and most people never do this simple step, which means they never actually know if they're making progress or just feeling like they are. Month 1 is about visibility and one piece of free money and nothing else. The instinct when people decide to fix their finances is to overhaul everything at once: a new budget, a debt payoff plan, an investment account, a side hustle, all starting the same week. That's how financial resolutions can die within weeks. Month 1 has exactly 2 jobs. The first job is tracking where your money actually goes, for 1 full month, without changing anything yet. Not a perfect category-by-category budget, just visibility. Pull up your last 30 days of transactions and sort them into a handful of rough buckets: housing, food, transportation, subscriptions and recurring charges, and everything else. Most people who do this for the first time find at least one thing that surprises them: a subscription they forgot they had, a category that's quietly bigger than they assumed, a pattern they didn't know was there. You're not trying to cut anything yet. You're just trying to see the shape of your own spending clearly, because you can't fix what you haven't actually looked at. The second job, if it applies to you, is checking whether your employer offers a 401k match and making sure you're getting all of it. If your employer matches part of what you contribute, that's an immediate return on your money that no investment can promise you. It's not a return on the market, It's a return that shows up specifically because you contributed. If you're already capturing your full match, this step takes 5 minutes to confirm. If you're not, adjusting your contribution percentage this month is worth more than almost anything else on this entire 6-month list, because match money you don't capture in a given pay period is often gone permanently, depending on your specific plan. This channel has a full breakdown of the account order that comes after this if you want the deeper version. For month 1, the only job is making sure you're not leaving free money on the table. By the end of month 1, you should have a rough map of where your money goes and confirmation that you're capturing any employer match available to you. That's it. No budget overhaul, no debt payoff plan yet, no investing decisions, just visibility and one piece of free money secured. It's worth understanding why the tracking step specifically comes first, ahead of any actual changes to spending. Every later phase in this sequence depends on knowing real numbers instead of guessed ones. How much debt is actually accruing interest, how large an emergency fund realistically needs to be for your specific expenses, how much you can automate without accidentally overcommitting and bouncing a payment somewhere else. Skipping straight to a debt payoff plan or an automated transfer without first knowing your real spending is how people end up automating an amount that looks good on paper and then quietly canceling it 3 weeks later because it didn't account for something real. Month 1 isn't a delay before the real work starts. It's what makes every later month accurate instead of a guess. Month 2 is where the real redirection starts, and it splits into 2 paths depending on what your month 1 tracking revealed. If you're carrying high-interest debt, credit cards, personal loans, anything charging somewhere north of 15 or 20%, that becomes the priority. If you're not, this month is about building a starter cash cushion instead. I'll walk through both, because which one applies to you matters more than almost any other decision in this entire plan. If high-interest debt is in the picture, here's the reasoning I'd use, not just the instruction. Paying down a balance charging 20% interest is functionally a guaranteed savings equal to that interest rate. Money you no longer hand over every single month just for carrying a balance. No investment can promise you a guaranteed 20% in any given year. That's why this debt gets attacked before almost everything else on this list, even before building extensive savings. With one exception, keep a small buffer, even a few $100s, so a minor emergency doesn't become a new credit card charge while you're paying down the old one. Beyond that small buffer, direct as much as you reasonably can at the highest interest balance first, making minimum payments on everything else. There's a decision buried in that sentence worth naming explicitly. Some people pay the highest interest debt first, which saves the most money mathematically. Others pay the smallest balance first, regardless of interest rate, because clearing an entire account creates a psychological win that keeps them motivated to continue. Picture 2 people, each carrying $3,000 of total debt spread across a couple of cards. One attacks the highest interest card first and pays a little less in total interest by the time everything's cleared. The other attacks the smallest balance first, pays that balance off completely within a month or 2, and uses that win to stay motivated through the larger balances that follow. The first approach is mathematically optimal. The second one sometimes finishes at all, when the first one gets abandoned in month 3 because progress felt too slow to notice. The math favors the first approach. The completion rate sometimes favors the second. Neither is wrong. The best method is the one you'll actually stick with for the months it takes to finish. If high-interest debt isn't part of your picture, month 2 is about building a starter emergency cushion instead. Not the full 3 to 6 month fund yet, just enough that a single unexpected expense doesn't derail everything else you're about to build. $1,000 to $2,000 is a reasonable target, sitting somewhere separate from your everyday checking account so it's not sitting right next to your debit card, visible every time you check your balance. The separation matters more than people expect. Money that's one tap away gets spent differently than money that takes a deliberate transfer to access, and a starter cushion that's too easy to reach tends to quietly become spending money again the first time something tempting comes up. This channel has gone deeper into exactly why that separation works. If you want the full explanation, for month 2, the short version is enough. Open a separate account, move the cushion there, and treat the friction as a feature, not an inconvenience. Whichever path applies to you, month 2 ends with either meaningful progress against high-interest debt or a starter cushion in place. Either way, you're no longer purely reactive. There's now a buffer or a debt payoff plan actively running in the background, whether you think about it every day or not. Month 3 is where automation enters the picture, because by now you have enough visibility and enough of a foundation that guessing isn't necessary anymore. This is the month I'd set up an automatic transfer, a fixed amount, moved on the same day your paycheck lands, into whatever the next priority is. If you're still working through high-interest debt, that automated amount goes toward the debt payoff, on top of minimum payments elsewhere. If your starter cushion is built and there's no high-interest debt, that automation starts building out the full emergency fund, working toward 3 to 6 months of essential expenses. The reason automation specifically goes here, in month 3 rather than month 1, is that it works best once you already know your numbers. Automating a transfer before you've tracked your spending means guessing at an amount that might be too aggressive to sustain or too timid to matter. By month 3, you've seen a full month of real spending data, which means the amount you automate is actually grounded in your real life instead of a number you picked out of hope. There's a mechanism worth understanding here, not just the instruction to automate. Money that moves before you see it never quite registers as yours to spend. The same way a paycheck deduction for taxes doesn't feel like a loss the way handing over cash would. Automating removes the decision from your hands at the exact moment your hands are most likely to make the wrong one, which is right after a paycheck lands and everything in your account looks spendable. Think about the version of this without automation. The plan is to save $200 a month, whatever's left over at the end of it. Most months, less than $200 actually survives to the end, not because of any one bad decision, but because $200 worth of small, reasonable-feeling purchases quietly happen first. Now flip the order. The $200 moves out on the same morning the paycheck lands, before any of those small decisions get made. Same income, same intention, same target amount, a completely different result, purely because of when the money moved relative to everything else competing for it. Month 4 is where investing enters, assuming the high-interest debt is handled and the full emergency fund is in place. If either one is still being built, that's completely fine. Keep the automation running and move this phase back until the foundation is ready. There's no prize for rushing into the market while you're still paying 20% interest somewhere else, or before you have real cash behind you if something goes wrong. For everyone else, month 4 is about opening the accounts that hold long-term investments and choosing something simple to put inside them. If you don't already have a Roth IRA, this is a reasonable month to open one. For 2026, the combined limit across traditional and Roth IRAs is $7,500, though nobody expects you to hit that limit in 1 month starting from zero. The point in month 4 isn't maxing anything out. It's opening the account and making the first automated contribution, however small, because the account existing and running is what matters far more than the size of the first deposit. Inside that account, I'd keep the actual investment about as simple as possible. A broad, low-cost index fund tracking something like the S&P 500 or the total U.S. stock market. Funds like these typically charge an expense ratio around 0.03%, which sounds tiny until you compare it to funds charging 1% or more that quietly take hundreds of dollars a year for often worse long-term performance. The mechanism matters more than the recommendation itself. A broad index fund doesn't try to guess which handful of companies will outperform. It owns hundreds or thousands of companies at once, in proportion to their size, and captures the market's overall growth without paying someone to make bets that, on average, underperform the index they're trying to beat. If you're enrolled in a high-deductible health plan and eligible for a health savings account, that's worth folding into month 4 as well, since it offers a combination of tax advantages that neither the 401k nor the Roth IRA can match on its own. At the federal level, eligible contributions can receive a tax advantage going in, the money can grow tax-free, and qualified medical withdrawals can come out tax-free. This channel has a full walkthrough of the complete account order, match, debt, emergency fund, Roth IRA, HSA, and beyond, if you want the deeper version of this decision. For month 4, the job is simpler. Open the accounts that apply to you, automate a contribution, and choose one broad fund instead of trying to build a complicated portfolio on day 1. Month 5 is a review and cleanup month, and it's the one people are most tempted to skip, because nothing about it feels like progress in the moment. It is progress, it's just the quiet kind. 4 things belong in this month. First, check your credit report. You're entitled to a free copy from each of the 3 major bureaus, and reviewing it once every 6 months or so catches errors that can genuinely cost you money. An account that isn't yours, a balance reported incorrectly, a late payment that shouldn't be there. Credit reporting errors are more common than people assume, and they can sit quietly on a report for years, affecting loan rates and approvals, until someone actually looks. Read through the account list line by line, checking that every account belongs to you, every balance roughly matches what you'd expect, and every payment history entry looks accurate. This isn't about obsessively tracking a credit score number, it's a periodic accuracy check on a document that affects real decisions later, like the interest rate you'll be offered the next time you need to borrow for anything at all. Second, look at whatever recurring charges month 1's tracking surfaced and ask, honestly, whether each one is still worth it. Not a dramatic subscription purge, just an honest look at the handful of charges that were surprising or forgotten back in month 1. Canceling 2 or 3 unused subscriptions won't transform your finances on its own, but redirected into the automation you set up in month 3, even a modest amount compounds meaningfully by the time you reach the accounts you built in month 4. Third, if you have any retirement accounts from a previous employer sitting untouched, this is the month to actually look at them instead of continuing to ignore them. The move isn't automatically to roll them over. Some old plans have genuinely good, low-fee options worth keeping. The task is simply to compare the fees and investment choices in the old plan against your current one and make an active decision, instead of leaving an old account to sit in whatever default fund it landed in years ago, quietly costing you in fees you've never actually looked at. Fourth, check your beneficiary designations on any retirement or investment accounts and take a quick look at whether your insurance coverage still matches your actual life. Beneficiaries on old accounts are one of the most commonly forgotten details in personal finance. People open a 401k at their first job, name whoever made sense at the time, and never touch it again, even after a decade of life changes that would have changed that answer. It takes about 5 minutes per account to check and update if needed, and it's the kind of thing that only matters enormously in exactly the situation nobody wants to think about, which is precisely why it's worth doing now rather than leaving it for later. None of month 5 is dramatic. All 4 tasks together take maybe an hour, spread across a month where the real financial work is happening automatically in the background from the systems you built in months 2 through 4. That's actually the point. By month 5, the ongoing effort should be shrinking, not growing, because the automation is doing the heavy lifting that used to require a decision every single time. Before month 6, let's talk about the ways this sequence actually breaks down, because knowing the failure points matters as much as knowing the steps. The first way it breaks is starting too many phases at once, trying to track spending, pay off debt, build an emergency fund, and open an investment account all in the same week, which is exactly the overwhelm this 6-month structure is designed to prevent. If you feel the pull to do everything immediately, that's worth resisting specifically, not indulging. The second way it breaks is treating a slow month as a failed month. If month two's debt payoff takes 4 months instead of 1, that's not the plan collapsing. Debt payoff timelines depend entirely on how much debt exists, and this sequence flexes around that automatically as long as you keep going. The third way it breaks is skipping month 5 because it doesn't feel like real progress compared to opening an investment account. It's the month most people abandon first, and it's also the month that quietly protects everything built in the months before it. An old 401k sitting in high fees or a credit report error nobody caught can undo real progress if it goes unchecked for long enough. The fourth way it breaks is comparing your month 3 progress to someone else's month 6 results, which is really just comparing your beginning to someone else's middle. Every phase here is sequential for a reason, and the sequence takes as long as it takes for your specific starting point. Month 6 is where you close the loop. Go back to that number you wrote down before month 1 started, your starting net worth, and calculate it again the same way. Everything you own minus everything you owe. For most people following this sequence, the number moves in the right direction, sometimes more than they expected, and sometimes less, depending on how much debt was involved and how aggressive the automation was. The exact size of the movement matters less than what it proves, that a system, not a burst of willpower, produced it. Sit with that comparison for a minute instead of rushing past it. The two numbers, 6 months apart, side by side, that's the actual receipt for everything you did in the months in between, whether it feels dramatic or modest. I want to be specific about what 6 months realistically produces, because I'd rather undersell this than oversell it. 6 months is very rarely enough time to build a fully funded emergency fund, pay off substantial debt, and max out multiple investment accounts simultaneously, starting from zero. What 6 months is enough time for is building the actual infrastructure, the automation, the accounts, the habit of checking in rather than reacting, that makes the following 6 months, and the 6 months after that, dramatically easier than they would have been without it. The hardest part of personal finance was never the math. It was building a system that runs without requiring willpower every single day, and that's exactly what this 6-month sequence is designed to produce. And I want to be honest about one more thing. For some people, income genuinely is the constraint, and no amount of sequencing creates money that isn't there. This sequence doesn't solve that, but wherever there is some margin to work with, this structure tells that money where to go first, instead of leaving it to drift the way it probably has been. What that looks like varies enormously depending on where you started, and that's worth saying plainly instead of glossing over. Someone starting with $2,000 of credit card debt and no dependents might clear that debt entirely by month 3 and spend months 4 through 6 actually investing for the first time in their life. Someone starting with $15,000 of debt might spend the full 6 months still working through it, with investing pushed into month 7 or 8 instead of month 4. Both of those are the system working exactly as designed. The person further behind isn't failing the plan, they're further along a longer road, and the sequence itself doesn't change, only how many months each phase takes. Comparing those two outcomes directly, and calling one a success and the other a disappointment misses the actual point, which is whether the trajectory changed relative to where each person would have been doing nothing at all. Remember that net worth statistic from the start of this, the one showing that most people never even calculate this number in the first place. Being able to state your number confidently in month 6, whatever it turns out to be, already puts you ahead of where you started in a way that has nothing to do with the dollar amount itself. Visibility is the foundation everything else in this sequence sits on top of, and it's the one thing that's fully available to you regardless of your starting balance. If you're behind on where this plan assumes you'd be at any given month, debt taking longer than expected, an emergency fund that's smaller than planned, an investment account that hasn't been opened yet, that's not a sign this doesn't work. Real life doesn't move in perfectly, even monthly increments. What matters isn't hitting each month's target precisely on schedule. It's whether the system is still running at all by month 6, even if some pieces are running behind where the calendar suggested they'd be. A system that's running slowly is still doing more than a plan that got abandoned in month 2 because it fell behind schedule once. Here's the actual sequence, put together the way I'd walk through it starting today. Before month 1, write down your starting net worth. Month 1, track a full month of spending and confirm you're capturing your full employer match. Month 2, attack high-interest debt if it exists, or build a small starter cushion if it doesn't. Month 3, automate a transfer toward whichever of those is still in progress. Month 4, once high-interest debt is handled and the full emergency fund is in place, open a Roth IRA and an HSA if eligible, automate a contribution, and choose a broad, low-cost investment inside them. Month 5, review your credit report, cut what's not worth keeping, check on any old retirement accounts, and confirm your beneficiaries are up to date. Month 6, recalculate your net worth and see what the system actually produced. None of this requires predicting the market or suddenly doubling your income. What income does change is how quickly you can move through each phase. It requires doing a small, specific thing each month, in an order that actually makes sense, and then letting automation carry the weight your motivation doesn't have to carry every single day. That's the entire 6 months. It was never about hustle. It was about sequence. If you've made it this far, you clearly care about actually understanding how this works instead of just being told to budget better and hoping that sticks. That's exactly what this channel is built around: breaking personal finance and investing down into the actual mechanics, the way I wish someone had explained it to me the first time. If that's useful to you, consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one. 6 months from now is going to arrive either way. The only question this video actually answers is what's true about your finances when it does. Whether you've spent those 6 months directing your money somewhere on purpose or letting another 6 months pass without a system behind it. Write the number down. Start month 1 this week. Let the calendar do the rest.